Today, I'm attempting to make spinach artichoke pinwheels. This is something I saw a picture of online and I thought, I like spinach artichoke dip. I like puff pastry. Why couldn't I stick spinach artichoke dip in puff pastry? I'm sure there's a recipe for this somewhere. In fact, I've done a little bit of research and I looked up how to make spinach puffs and other related pastry type dishes with spinach and artichoke in them. But we're going to try to make this, and what could go wrong, right? We've made puff pastry before while making Danish on this channel, but it's always a good thing to revisit. To start, we'll combine 200 grams of all-purpose flour, 13 grams of sugar, and a pinch of salt in a large bowl. Then add and break up 142 grams of chilled unsalted butter, which is 1 stick plus 2 tablespoons. Ripping the pieces of butter apart and mixing with the dry ingredients until you get a sandy texture. Then we'll slowly add 2 tablespoons of ice water. The key to flaky puff pastry, and pie dough for that matter, is keeping the butter as cold as possible while working on the dough. When it goes into the oven, the butter melts and the water in the butter evaporates, leaving behind pockets of air that create the puffed, flaky texture that we love. Keeping the butter cold before it hits the oven will help this process. Once the dough is mixed, we'll cover tightly with plastic wrap and let it rest in the fridge for at least 1 hour to re-solidify and chill all the way through while we're mixing up the filling. For the filling, I simply whipped 8 ounces of softened cream cheese in my stand mixer until creamy. I roughly chopped an 8-ounce can of artichoke hearts and around 4 cups of spinach leaves, which I added to the cream cheese and mixed until well combined. Then I just put the mixture in a container in the fridge until I was ready to use. When the pastry dough was thoroughly chilled, I rolled it out sort of the way you would when making cinnamon rolls, and then spread the filling evenly across the surface of the dough, rolled it up, and cut in about 2-inch wide pinwheels. And then they were ready to bake. Since I was making it up as I went and didn't have a recipe to tell me what temperature to bake at and for how long, I decided to start low at 400 degrees. My thinking here is that if they're not baking up correctly, I could always increase the temperature, but it's harder to start at a high temperature and reduce the heat, and you'd have a higher risk of burning them. This is also a great example of how you can build on your cooking knowledge and start cooking and baking without recipes, because if you've made any type of pie before, you could pull on that knowledge since puff pastry and pie dough are extremely similar. Most pies bake somewhere between 350 and 400 degrees, and low and slow is the name of the game, so they bake for around 20 minutes. This can vary based on if there's filling in the pie or not, but it would at least give you a ballpark figure to start with. At least that's my thought process, so it may be helpful to you too. Okay, this is true trial and error. Since I haven't made these before, I don't know what temperature to bake them at or how long to bake them for. I started out with 400 degrees for 15 minutes, and then they weren't as brown as I liked them, so I knew they needed longer. I put them in for another 5 minutes, and they're still not quite there yet, so I turned up the temperature a little bit to 425, left them for another 5 minutes, and now I'm gonna check them again. I'm glad that I used this pan because, as I suspected with the raw spinach rather than frozen, there's a little bit of moisture in the bottom that if I didn't have this grate, the moisture would sit there and the puff pastry would get soggy instead of stay crisp. I think they could still use a little bit longer. They're getting more brown, so that's good. That's a good sign. So I'm gonna put them back in. I'm gonna do another 4 or 5 minutes. That's usually a good marker. And then I'll just continue checking them and doing it for a longer time until they're nice and browned and not so squishy. When I was just feeling them right now, I'm They're going to be a little bit squishy because the filling on the inside is squishy filling, but I want the puff pastry to be crisp. So once it's crisp and browned, I know they'll be done. I'm gonna try this little one. Yeah, see on the bottom, there's lines from where it kind of like sank in between the lines of the sheet. But again, like, I'd kind of rather that than soggy puff pastry because, ugh, that's just gross. This is super crispy, flaky. I mean, like, look, you can see the layers in the puff pastry. Let's try it with the filling. Whoa. Oh man. Okay, the puff pastry by itself is like just shattering. It's so flaky. It is quite savory, however. There's not really any like acidity going on here. I instinctively want to put like hot sauce or something, but it is like I'm dipping puff pastry into spinach artichoke dip and it's really good. Oh my gosh, it's so good. Victory! I said earlier that I started out at 400 degrees and then I increased to 425. A couple of things when baking these, if you're gonna try them at home. What I'd recommend is something that I forgot to do, which is silly of me, is to egg wash them. That will help them brown on the outside. I don't know why I didn't think to do that, but here we are. Second thing is, I would either do 400 for like 25 minutes or 425 for 15, and then at both those increments, check them and go longer if you need to in 5-minute increments. Overall, I did 20 minutes at 400 degrees and 10 to 15 minutes at 425, and they're perfect. Honestly, the filling, if you wanted to add something, you could maybe add like garlic or Parmesan cheese sprinkled on top when you're spreading out the filling, but they don't need anything. I think they're good as they are. I'm a firm believer in keep it simple, stupid. You don't need to add like 10 million ingredients for things to be delicious. Just let the fresh ingredients speak for themselves. Pairing it with something acidic is probably a good idea. Or maybe something spicy. I feel like this is the beginning of a phase of me just making puff pastry and filling it with random stuff. Get ready. If you like this video or you learned something, give it a like. If you'd like to learn more, subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye.